Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, unleashing growth potential for defense contractors. In today's episode, we continue down the road of understanding CMMC, its regulations, and controls. Up next is AU L2-3.3.2. Ensure that the actions of individual system users can be uniquely traced to those users so they can be held accountable for their actions. We'll break down what this control means, why it matters, and how it impacts your organization's cybersecurity posture. We'll also provide practical insights and strategies for achieving compliance and securing your systems effectively. So whether you're a defense contractor aiming to win more contracts or simply someone interested in bolstering your cybersecurity knowledge, you're in the right place. Great Scott! We're joined once again today by Mike Frieder, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMMC Professional Assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
You know, that Great Scott intro reminds me that it's probably about time for me to enjoy a Back to the Future watching marathon, but that's just me.
Hey, you know what? Nothing says Back to the Future like compliance.
Said no one ever. But anyway, so today we're talking about the importance of being able to trace the actions of individual users. So for this one, the why is kind of stated within the control itself, but why is it important to ensure that individuals can be uniquely traced for accountability?
You know, Roman, I'll tell you, this is a very interesting control because the control is maybe like one of the first controls that begins to deviate from what I would consider is normal in a lot of IT systems, particularly systems where you have shop floors or manufacturing environments where you may have one computer out on a floor with many users that need to use it for one reason or another. Maybe it's quality testing, maybe it's time input, time cards, etc. And so, you know, the control is basically saying, hey, look, if what they're doing is accessing CUI, then what they're going to need to do is be individually traceable in their actions. In other words, we don't want a computer that's just kind of hanging out in the open to be able to access CUI. We want to be able to know whose account got compromised or who is a bad actor, an insider threat, if there is some kind of illicit access to CUI. You know, we really want to be able to trace that person down, cut off their access, find out what happened down to the individual user. And I think that level of accountability is something that is new for a lot of IT admins, certainly new if you've never implemented anything like NIST SP 800-171 before. And so I think, you know, again, if you're an IT admin, you're kind of used to having, you know, shared workstations. That's a big no-no with NIST SP 800-171 when it comes to accessing CUI. CUI access should be granular down to the user and realistically, probably also down to what devices are even capable of accessing it as well. And this is one of the first controls that really starts to dive in there and say, hey, there are some conventional things that get done in commercial businesses that are not acceptable in the defense world for the sake of information security. So yeah, this is definitely one of those. And, you know, it's a very important control. And for those people who do have shop floor computers, you ask yourself, how do you deal with that? There's a multitude of ways of dealing with that. I'll show you that one of my favorites is this solution called Gatekeeper. We just absolutely love it. It's a USB and key fob proximity sensor. Essentially what it does is it bypasses the Windows login system and each individual employee gets a fob of some sort, an RFID fob. They walk up to the machine unlocks instantly. There's no log on process. The machine's already logged in, but it traces who was in front of the machine at the time. When they walk away, it automatically locks again. And it keeps a record of who came and went right there in Active Directory, which is so cool. And it can even have its own standalone system for it as well. So that's one way. And then, of course, other ways are just don't allow those sort of shop floor type accounts that multiple people have passwords to. You know, no one should have more than one account. No one should have access to, no account should have more than one person that has access to it. You know, again, you've got to be able to trace the individual actions back to those users. And that's what this control is really all about. So there's lots of ways to do it. This is one of those where you may get a little bit of cultural pushback, right? Especially if you're in an old school manufacturing company and they're just sort of used to being able to walk up to a computer and start using it. We're going to need a little bit more control over user actions this way. Going to need to lock them down a little bit more. And, you know, there may be a little bit of challenge there.
Absolutely. Fob is a fun word. But I digress. Uh, it's a very important control, so why don't you tell us what the key assessment points are on this one?
So there are two there are two primary assessment points in this. But before I get into that, I also was actually curious about what fob stands for in the term key fob.
You just
And
Googled it, didn't you?
I mean, I just looked it up because I felt like I say key fob like 50 times a day explaining these controls to people. And did you know, Roman, did you know that the word fob was likely derived from the German FUPA? Is it FUPA? It could be. I don't know.
Interesting.
Meaning pocket. Before key fobs were an electronic device, they were another word for decorative keychains throughout the 20th century. I did not know that a key fob is German for FUPA, which
Well,
is
that's funny because, and I'm not sure if it was during my work for this or yesterday or whatever. I just realized that a fax machine, right? I just realized that fax for fax machine is short for facsimile. That
and what's
never
facsimile mean? I have no idea.
it never occurred to me. Facsimile, if I'm not mistaken, is like if something is like close to or a replacement for or something in the neighborhood of something else. Like a reasonable facsimile is kind of like a knockoff. So it's like you have item A and then item B is a reasonable facsimile of item A. Kind of, sort of.
Yes.
Maybe I'm completely wrong. If we got any grammar people out there, if I'm wrong, tell us in the comments. But I just realized earlier today or earlier this week that fax as in fax machine is short for facsimile, and that blew my mind. I don't know why. Uh, but not
And whenever you see a key fob, you should now think of FUPA.
I don't think I ever won't think about it because I didn't take Spanish in high school. I didn't do any of that, but I know that fumar means smoking because it always says no fumar inside an elevator.
That is exactly correct. And
Uh,
interestingly, it has something to do with highlighters as well, which I think just because they smell.
but on that ridiculous note, why don't you go ahead and tell us what the assessment points are on
Yeah,
this
so
one?
there's two primary assessment points. The first one is determine if the content of the audit records needed to support the ability to uniquely trace users to their actions is defined. Now, this is a big assessment point with an easy answer. The easy answer is we're going to put on our system security plan that it's implemented within the SIEM solution. If you're not familiar with SIEM, again, security information and event management. That's going to be all the log files that are transmitted to that central repository. In that central repository, it will be able to throw away the needless information and peel out all the security relevant information and then cause alerts from that. So again, it's your SIEM solution that will ultimately determine if the content of those audit records is there to uniquely support and trace users to their actions, and it's defined. Now, again, an assessor may dive into the configuration of your SIEM. They may want to ask some specific questions about what it is you're monitoring for and things like that. But ultimately, the easiest answer there is that it's implemented via the SIEM solution. The second one is determine if audit records, once created, contain the defined content. So again, same answer, it's implemented via the SIEM solution. And you may even put a little extra information there saying something to the extent of, the SIEM engineers or the SOC engineers, Security Operations Center engineers, review those audit records and determine that they contain content that is what it's supposed to be. Again, it's really just all in how the alerts are set up from your SIEM system. That's what it's all about. Surely there's a lot of other things you could probably put in those answers. It's obviously unique to your system, but those are some quality sample answers that will at least point you in the right direction for answering this.
Absolutely. So I did ask our listeners in the comments to tell us what facsimile are, but the OCD in me would not let me go without knowing, so I Googled it while you were answering that question. And a facsimile is an exact copy, especially in written or paper form. So a fax machine is that's why it's short for facsimile, because a facsimile is literally a copy of.
Makes you wonder why they don't call copiers faxes and faxes copiers.
They're basically I mean, you're exactly right. I think the only difference is that a fax machine can go from point A to point B. A copier is just, I have it in my hand, I need more, let me put it here. That's literally the only difference. So you have a point.
So, what's interesting is I'm looking over these assessment points.
Hmm.
The assessment points versus the control, to me, they're looking at different things. So the control, ensure that the actions of individual system users can be uniquely traced to those users so they can be held accountable for their actions. That's the control. And you would
Hmm.
think that you have to describe things like all systems require an individual user login and stuff like that. But the
Right.
assessment points are all pointing at the SEAM solution. I just think it's generally interesting because I don't think that the assessment points are particularly well lined up with what the question is that they ask in the control. Again,
Interesting.
another just reason why this compliance standard, as good as it is infinitely complicated. Because if you just simply didn't look at the assessment points and you started giving an answer to what 3.3.2 was in plain English logic, uh, boy, all I can tell you is that you would answer incorrectly. You would not be addressing the assessment points, which is exactly why you listen to this podcast. Hit up our YouTube channel because we teach you the real about what you need to know to be compliant and get through this horribly illogical thing that we know, like, and trust, being NIST SP 800-171 and CMMC and all that fun stuff. You got to really watch out for that because some of these controls can trip you up and really confuse you. That is for sure.
And how? So what are the are there any potential difficulties here, since the control, at least in the reading of it, seems pretty straightforward, but maybe the control points, as you said, aren't quite the same. Are there any potential difficulties in enacting this one for your organization?
So, from a difficulty perspective, I think the first thing is that most organizations who have not had to comply with something like this before, they're not going to have a SEAM solution in a lot of cases. If they're really large organizations with well-seasoned IT veterans, yes. But I think most small to mid-sized contractors, no way. They're just not going to have it. So I think from that perspective, it's difficult. You've got to be ready to implement a SIEM solution. And if you have a SIEM solution, you need to be ready to, dive deep into the configurations, look at it, and make sure what it's reporting on is relevant. And then the second piece of that is that, you're challenged just a little bit with any kind of environment that might require shared logins. We've either got to use an enduring exception, which we all know we don't want to have an enduring exception. We just want to secure it the right way. In that case, you need special circumstances requiring that. Or, you're going to have to have a cultural, meeting of some sort, right? Like you're going to have to alter the culture of those people who are used to just being able to walk up to machines and not identify themselves and begin using it. Um, I've gotten into long conversations over the efficiency of this. In other words, shop floor managers will say, listen, if you make my guys log into this every time they use it, you're going to kill like an hour of everybody's day just logging into machines over and over again. And
Hmm.
that's real, you guys. I mean, in manufacturing, I don't know if people are aware of this, but in a lot of manufacturing, they're costing things by the second, right? Like every second that shop floor worker is there between breaks, that's cost that goes into the delivery of the product. And so, training time and time logging into machines, those things are all very reasonably factored into how much work a worker can turn out, especially in today's highly leveraged, low human count manufacturing operations, right? So yeah, really good thought there. And I think that those are the kinds of challenges. Now, again, we've helped hundreds of manufacturers and people in the defense industry get through these challenges. We know exactly how to talk to people about cultural change. We know how to train it. We know how to justify why these changes have to happen. We can be the bad guys, right? We can come in and be the bad guys and explain to them that the big bad consultant said this is how it's got to be. And we know how to get them to listen to us and put it in such a way where they understand the value behind doing that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges with this one because it would go against the grain. There's an old saying which is being secure means being less convenient. And that is a very true statement. And I think a definite challenge. So, again, we this is a security versus convenience control for sure. And that's also a big challenge.
Absolutely. So that's a ton of great information, and it's really interesting to learn that maybe the assessment points on this one don't necessarily line up with what you think they would line up with when you read the control. But if you've been a long time listener of this podcast or viewer on YouTube, and we hope you have, and if you're new here, welcome. We're weird. We talk about what FACS is short for and FOB and that kind of thing. On top of helping you with compliance, we try to make it as fun as possible because these topics can be a bit dry. With that being said, we try to cap off every episode with a silly question that can sometimes be related to the topic, sometimes not. But even if it's not, Mike is very good at making it relevant. So with that being said, some of our compliance controls, we haven't gotten there yet here, but some of our later compliance controls that we'll get to often talk about packet sniffing. And when I first read that back in when I first started here, when I first read that, it made me think of bomb sniffing dogs and dogs that can do that kind of thing. So with that being said, the silly question for today is if you're trying to trace activities back to users and keep them accountable for their actions, could you potentially bring in file sniffing dogs to trace each user's activity?
Mm. It's a good question. It's a good question.
I
Have you ever
tried.
noticed lately, if you're traveling, that there are way more service dogs than there ever have been before? I
Yes,
happen
actually.
to I happen to have some rental properties, and I had this woman who all of a sudden out of nowhere brought two service dogs and three service cats into a property of mine. We thought that was kind of funny, and we discovered that it's very inexpensive to go and get a dog to be certified as a service dog, so you can travel with the dog and take the dog, places that normal dogs can't go because they're not service animals. Just kind of a random thought because I was in shock about how many service animals are now all over the place everywhere I go.
It's also
Um,
very easy to get an animal classified as an emotional support animal,
Maybe that's
uh,
it.
which can function as far as being able to take in places you wouldn't normally, the same as a service dog. A service dog is obviously there for people that need assistance. An emotional support animal can be, I just need him with me because it makes me feel better. But I think it's partly to do with the increase of emotional support animals as well.
Yeah. I was on a cruise ship and there was a comic on the cruise ship and he was remarking about the idea that everybody needs an emotional support animal all of a sudden. And what did people do 20 years ago when there wasn't a such thing as an emotional support animal? And they were also commenting about how this is the single most hydrated generation on Earth.
Yeah.
Every kid, every kid walks around with a water bottle 100% of the time now. And I think to myself, I didn't pee this much when I was younger. And first I thought it was because I was an old man. But then I realized, no, I just have a water bottle by me every minute of the day. And that's probably why I pee so much.
When I was in college, there was a baseball player on the school team that would walk around with a full gallon of water, like, and he would be carrying it everywhere he went. And it was the first time I saw that. And then several other baseball players started picking it up, and now you go outside, and like you said, there's everybody. I have a water bottle that is of a full 64 ounces, so I fill it up at the start of the day and I consume it throughout the day. But back to file sniffing dogs. Can you train dogs to to track user activity uh, through files?
Yeah, I guess I can't really get around the question with jokes today. So,
But
computers don't really have a lot of smell to them. So I think it might be pretty tough for dogs to control one person walking up to a computer versus another and using the same login, i.e. tailgating. So, you know what, Roman? I think it's a flat fail on this one. I got nothing for you. I think they cannot. I think sadly,
it would be a good idea to if you have one of these programs that is designed to trace user activity, you could name the software after, like, you could name it Fido or Rover, so that it could act, because it would almost act as a file sniffer. Be like, oh, this came from so and so.
I do believe that there is some kind of encryption called FIDO. I have to look into that one.
I just
Anyway, that's about all the answer I got on that one, man.
I
That
just triggered
was
some kind of deja vu for you, I think. But
Uh,
obviously, this has been a bit more unhinged episode than it usually is. We are a lot closer to the end of the week than we usually are when we record these, so maybe we're getting a little slap happy and excited for the weekend. But on that note, that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever-evolving world of defense. We'd like to thank Mike for joining us today and getting a little silly while talking about tracing activity. Thanks, Mike.
hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
But the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us on our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. If they haven't already, what should they do, Mike?
Well, they should like, subscribe, and they should definitely tell a friend about this podcast because it's probably the most entertaining thing this side of the DoD.
There you go. Tell all your friends. Tell them to subscribe on their favorite podcast platform, as well as you subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, because when you do that, you get notified when new episodes like this one are released. And we'd truly appreciate it if you could, like Mike said, take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you thought-provoking episodes and high-quality content. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like I'm talking very, very fast. Join us next time as we delve further into the dynamic world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.